Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of citiesabc.com series of interviews with global thought leaders, academics, and experts that are leading and changing the world, cities, countries, and as well reinventing the way we look at the world in a post-COVID-19 ecosystem. Cities ABC is a platform that is a 4AR smart cities digital platform for reinventing and uniting cities, universities, and citizens. It was created by a global network of academics and actually a lot of thought leaders and influencers and industry leaders. And the idea here is precisely to create a positive beacon of faith that we need that particular, giving what is happening in the world, but as well reflecting the biggest themes and the biggest areas that are changing society as we know it. And today I'm honored to have with us someone that is actually working on the cutting edge of probably the biggest epicenter of technology in the world, that is artificial intelligence. So we have Professor Michael Rovatsos, that is a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Edinburgh and director of the Base Center, the University Innovation Hub for Data Science and AI. He also represents the university at the Alan Turing Institute, the UK National Institute for Data Science and AI. And his research is developing around AI, algorithms and architectures to support collaboration between human, sharing economy, electronic commerce, logistics, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that are actually the most powerful things that we are doing as humans. And of course, there's a lot of questions, especially with everything happening in the world. But we'll welcome you, Professor Michael. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So
Hello.
To start, so it's great, and I think I have a lot of questions. So probably we would need a couple of hours, but we'll have to limit to the 1 hour. And so I think to start, I would like to start by the basis. So a bit of your background and where you're coming from, education. And how do you end up in the Edinburgh University? I think just to get a bit of the basis and the foundations.
Of course. So my name is Michael Rovatsos. I'm a professor of AI at the University of Edinburgh, and I came to Edinburgh around 15 and a bit years ago. I am Greek by birth. I spent the first few years of my life in Greece, then grew up in Germany, in the south of Germany, in the Bavarian Alps. A very pleasant way to grow up until you get a bit older, and then you're looking for bigger places. Then I did my first degree in computer science in Saarbrücken, and then my PhD in Munich. And I worked for an AI startup during the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s in Frankfurt. And then I was appointed lecturer at the University of Edinburgh in 2004, where I then went on to be a senior lecturer, reader, and professor. And now I've been leading the Base Center, the new center the university has started in order to support innovation in AI and data science and other key new digital technologies from about just over 2 years ago. My story around coming to Edinburgh was that when I was an undergrad in Germany, Saarbrücken was one of the other kind of key places in Europe that did a lot of AI. And this was my motivation to go to this otherwise not very well-known town. And when I went there and talking to my professors and so on, I found out that there had been really a long-standing collaboration with Edinburgh. And Edinburgh, in fact, is not only a 400-year-old institution that has a lot of huge track record in creating knowledge and changing the world, but also it was the third place in the world that did AI, starting in the mid-60s, just after Stanford and MIT. We were the first place where you could study AI in Europe, and it remains one of the biggest computing departments in Europe, building on that history. So I found out about these things when I was an undergrad, and my first visit to Edinburgh was as a visiting undergraduate student when I was around 21. And I was so impressed by what I saw and by the city and by the university and by the department that I decided to come back when the opportunity presented itself after my PhD. So what's really interesting about Edinburgh is that it has not just this track record, but it also is really very active in all areas of AI. So if you just take the School of Informatics, which is, as I said, one of the biggest computing departments in Europe, that school has produced over 50% of the papers that are submitted to the regular research assessments that the government conducts compared to all of the UK. So that's a pretty impressive achievement. And it has 6 research institutes, and nowadays 4 of these focus on AI. Two other things have changed in the meantime. Of course, AI itself has almost, we could say, exploded in terms of attention and impact and adoption in industry. And the other thing that has happened is, of course, that we used to think of tech and of digital as kind of one industry, and now we see that it's actually impacting all markets and all sectors. And that sort of explains a bit my role in the Bayes Center. So the Bayes Center is named after Thomas Bayes, who, as many viewers will know, was established some of the mathematical foundations that underpin a lot of modern statistical machine learning. And he was briefly an undergrad at the University of Edinburgh, and that's why we decided to name the center after him. The center is part of a massive investment in data-driven innovation. So in the Edinburgh region, we have what's called a city region deal, an economic development program that's about £1.5 billion, and around half of that, around 660 million, will go into data-driven innovation. So it's a very, very ambitious plan to really boost the regional economy and national economy through the use of data and AI. So in the Bayes Center, that's the first of the innovation hubs the university has established using that investment. And we have very ambitious targets. Over 10 years, we want to upskill 100,000 people in data. We want to create 400 new companies. We want to also really work with at least 1,000 external organizations to help them benefit from the use of data. And so the anticipated benefit to the economy is, will be somewhere in the area between 2.5 and 5 billion gross value added to the regional and Scottish economy. And my role in this as director is really to coordinate the over 40 partner organizations we have in the building, some academic, many industrial, some public sector. And this goes really all the way from startups and SMEs to big corporates, with different types of relationships between them. And what really our task is to create an environment where we bring academics and students, so all that talent and the smarts, together with industry challenges and with investment from the business world to really drive innovation, to accelerate innovation, all the way from supporting startups to doing big R&D projects. So I'm in charge of kind of coordinating all of that, and for the overall delivery of that program. We've only just started a couple of years ago, but we're making great progress. And this has also kind of, on a personal level, broadened my horizon a bit. So rather than just focusing on research, I'm now much more looking to establish partnerships with other organizations to really turn that research into real world impact.
That's quite impressive, to say less, and I think very bold, and I think super necessary. So I would like to go, before we go more, I have a lot of questions about Bayes Center at the university, but I would like to talk about your research. And I think so, and how do you see AI? Because, for instance, there was a fantastic research recently that was stating that more than technology, AI is an ideology. And the ideology that touches, artificial intelligence, the idea of machine learning, which is kind of the first stage where we are when we touch AI. But AI is a massive concept that goes a lot of the things. So I would like to touch this part, and this probably can go for a 1 hour or 2 hours lecture, but I would like to probably summarize how do you see AI being an expert and as well a researcher and as well an industry and an academic leader.
So I've been in AI now for 20 years. My own area is what's called multi-agent systems. So systems that involve different artificial or human agents. And I'm really concerned with building the architectures and algorithms that allow people and or multiple agents to cooperate or collaborate. So think about the algorithms you need to run kind of e-commerce applications or supply chain logistics type things. So anything that involves different stakeholders with different priorities. There's a lot of methods that come there from economics, from game theory, but also distributed optimization, things that are similar to operations research and so on. And in terms of how I view this AI landscape evolving, I think when I came into the field, AI always goes through these hype cycles. When I came into this field in the 90s, it was all about agents and autonomy. It was all about this idea that, you know, we create some individual software agents or robots that actually encapsulate lots of the decision making and reasoning and analyzing the world around them and making decisions so we can devolve some intelligence from people to these kind of bots and robots. Machine learning, an area that is very big now, was already big then, but we didn't have the compute ability and the amounts of data that we have now. So, so what my field kind of failed to do back then is to achieve the kind of adoption we're seeing now with these newer technologies. I think it's very important to distinguish between kind of, you know, AI as a scientific discipline and AI as the kind of AI-related technologies we are seeing flourish in industry and in real-world applications. So, of course, AI as a discipline, as you pointed out, is extremely broad. It covers everything from studying robots, studying language, studying reasoning and knowledge, how we describe knowledge and how we do inference over that knowledge, all the way to learning, adaptation, and the sorts of things, for example, also that I do in my own research. However, and you can have two different areas of focus there. You're either trying to understand how intelligence works, which is maybe less relevant for actually developing the applications. It's more like, you know, like physics, like astronomy studies space. So, you know, intelligence is a phenomenon. How can we use computer models to understand it? And then, of course, you go very broad and you look at all kinds of different things. In terms of the technologies that have reached the maturity where we're seeing them now used every day, that's when we talk about AI, we really actually are talking about a very small number of things that are already working well and scale sufficiently, are computationally tractable, and have seen widespread adoption. And I would say that these are primarily the things around machine learning, data analytics, predictive analytics, and anything to do with really turning data into insight to make better decisions, I think, from a business point of view. The second one is slightly more involved and specific, is anything to do with natural language processing, machine translation, voice assistants, chatbots, anything that is to do with processing language and generating and consuming language and understanding it, where we've achieved massive improvements over the last 20 years. So when I started university, I remember a professor saying, we will never be able to robustly recognize human speech and understand what somebody's saying. And there you go. This is now on everybody's mobile phone. So that's another thing that has changed, another technology that is much more mature. And the third one, although to a lesser extent in real world applications that we see, and maybe more specific to certain sectors, is robotics. So that's another area where we've done a lot of progress. So I would say, these are the three areas where we're really seeing concrete business impact against a much wider and more ambitious long-term program of research around AI. And what I want to say about even the ones where we are seeing benefits, the techniques, I think, because there is, as you say, AI has almost become an ideology. There is a perception that the fundamental algorithms, the methods, the research findings that have helped this boom in AI, that they are quite novel. In fact, a lot of them are quite well understood and have been around for a while. Of course, they're being constantly improved. But I would really like to emphasize that the big step change has come about from having more compute power and exponentially more data. So as you know, the data we've gathered over the last 2 years is more than what humanity has collected throughout its existence, and this keeps growing at an exponential growth. So the real, I think the real benefit in some ways that I anticipate for the next few years. I mean, of course, we hope that there will be step changes in terms of really having kind of cheap humanoid robots that can help you in an operating theater, or the kind of virtual assistants that understand everything you say and help you complete all your tasks and are much more intelligent than the ones we have now. But I think by and large, the immediate benefit will come from relatively basic and simple data analytics and machine learning being adopted on a much wider scale. So what I'm seeing is that actually while everybody talks about AI, we still suffer from actually only relatively few people being able to use even the most mature and kind of off-the-shelf techniques. There is a huge demand of businesses and organizations having access to some data that might help them, that aren't able to derive most insight from that data. So I really think if we could achieve a much wider adoption of the things that are relatively straightforward and well understood, that would already give us a massive benefit. Although, of course, as an academic, I would say I want to shoot for the stars, and in my own research and in my own area, I of course will always be looking at the things we can't solve yet. But we have to be aware of the pipeline from inception of new ideas to actual application. And right now, I think in terms of how the world can benefit from AI, of course, we need to focus on the low-hanging fruit and on upskilling really a lot of people to be able to apply them in their jobs.
So you touch a lot of the different things, and of course we cannot touch all of them, but I would like to touch one or two things in particular what you mentioned. So one thing, like you mentioned, there's the study of intelligence, which is a big thing, to say less, and which is probably critical for us to look. And the other thing, of course, is taking this into practical uses that can be used for a lot of different things. So one of the things I want to do, and probably going from the theory to practice, but as well, especially touching in all the areas that you're doing, both as researcher and as well as an industry leader and academic leader, is that we are in a very kind of, I would say, I don't know how to say it, because there's a lot of different ways. I will try to not go political, but we are in a very sensitive time in history of mankind. In one end, we have more technology than ever. Well, actually, there was never, actually, we have better. Even with the massive crisis we're facing in the world, we have less poverty than ever, but we have a massive perception of intelligence and the perception of even almost we are dividing the world into phases. So we have these people that are using kind of the result of science and AI to question everything and to question authorities, academic authorities, and even creating all the fake news, which is partly built with AI. And then we have, of course, people like you and us that try to use this for good and as well to change the world. But this is kind of creating a massive clash of civilization. And partly I would say if you look at history, we see probably this, and there's a couple of other historic people looking at this, is like what happened with the Roman Empire, which was the most advanced civilization besides ours, and that suddenly crashed, and it gave age or give birth to the Middle Ages as we know it. That became, of course, more driven by cities and less by civilizations. So how do you see these levels? So point one, and the first question is, definitely the way we humans coexist, both in terms of education, both in terms of using the tools, is right now probably more fragmented than ever. And I'm sure that that's why I want to touch you as a teacher and as well an industry or policymaker, is that the challenge is how can we tackle this and how do you see this? Because this is becoming a massive problem. If you see the news, well, first of all, even if you use data and AI data for looking at the news, we see that a huge part of the news are fake. But we have a lot of governments question authority of universities, question really basic scientific knowledge. And this is having a huge impact, especially the way we're building artificial intelligence, because in the other end, we're using artificial intelligence to propaganda and to come back to the old part of humanity, which takes us to two levels. And sorry, I'm going around circles, but I want to go there. So the question is, so when we study AI and human intelligence, okay, human intelligence is in one end the brain, but there's emotional intelligence. And unfortunately, the part of the brain, the more scientific part, and the human intelligence, not always mixed together. So how do you see this angle, especially in building AI solutions? Because like you mentioned, as we build more data and machine learning data, most of this data is being used right now for not necessarily the best things. And it's starting to disrupt the world economy, the world political system, and a lot of other things that are for right now being weaponized for making social experiments or even social changes. And of course, this can be taken to the different angles, but I would like to have probably on that angle in specific, how do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is one area where I think actually the AI community throughout its history has to be a little bit blamed for putting this emphasis on the individual's intelligence. So all the old ideas about first beating a computer at chess, then beating it at Go, and so on. I think what we have demonstrated probably is that the problem is less one of can I be faster than a human brain or better than a human brain at solving one particularly intellectually difficult task. That can probably be demonstrated with enough time and enough effort on any kind of task that is more like a quiz or like a mathematical problem or something. Even if it's physical, eventually we will probably have an arm that can perform surgery. What we didn't crack and maybe didn't focus enough on is really what happens when different people develop these systems in parallel and these systems interact with each other, given that they are built and influenced by humans. And the key thing, the key notion I would emphasize there is the notion of trust. So in the past, we've always seen that institutions, technologies, and economies have thrived when they managed to maintain the public's trust. And I think what we're seeing now is that we put in place the internet, we put in place mobile technologies, we put in place cloud computing, all the infrastructures, but we didn't think so much about what is the mechanism by which trust will be embedded in those. And one reason for that, there is actually also something that maybe was present already but not visible. One reason, as a global society, we never had set up a global system for trusting each other. It was always done with the manipulations and strategies of every individual player. Now, of course, if you can exert influence through digital systems on a global scale, but you don't have that coordination and agreement between all the players, then then it's going to undermine the social relationships and tensions between countries and within nations and so on. So I think this is a real, on the one hand, it's a real kind of geopolitical problem, but on the other, it's also for the technologists. So for me personally, I ask myself, what would make these AI systems trustworthy? And I'm trying to look at other technologies, and I'm thinking, okay, what if other safety critical technologies were like AI? So for example, what if people had just invented airplanes and everybody was just flying their planes as they like? What would we expect? In traditional engineering, you have standards, you have international agreements, you have a verification framework to actually, where the manufacturer, the technologist is asked to secure, to guarantee the safety. And I think what we've experienced in tech is that because of the great acceleration, these institutional things are far behind. So we don't really have, a seal of approval when you get the system from the vendor that it is robust against not only manipulation from its users, but even manipulation from the organization deploying it, right? For example, if you I know from my research, if you are asking for research funding, you have to fill in certain ethical assessments where you say, well, the thing you develop, can it be weaponized, right? So we don't have such standards for AI in general. When you go to a vendor and you buy it, do they have to? Are they answerable to some authority to say this? We have guaranteed that this cannot be manipulated and weaponized. So I think there is. I guess the answer I'm giving is also very complex, but I think what we have to think about is what are the foundations of making AI trustworthy. Some of these foundations are technological. So sometimes you just have to have the testing and validation procedures in place to make sure for example, if you are you can detect the fake news. Otherwise, you will not be allowed to deploy your social media platform. But you also need the institutional framework. So you need the people who can enforce these rules and who can sanction them. And the third thing you need the public debate. I think at the moment, one of the big problems is that the people are concerned about a lot of things. At the same time, they're quite vulnerable because they don't understand the technologies very well, and they don't understand how to use them critically. So I think education is a big part of that. And so only if you have kind of a tech industry buying into this principle of supporting good societal outcomes as objectives of what they're developing, plus the governments and regulators who have the mechanisms to deal with that technology. I think it's also fair to say most governments and organizations are just not ready to solve these problems. And the third one is the public debate. So actually society tells us what these systems should be like. Because I think at the moment, what's happening, you mentioned fake news. Fake news is essentially a very smart way of undermining both algorithms that aren't able to deal with the manipulation and humans who will be willingly proliferating false information unintentionally because they don't understand or see what's going on. So it's almost like, even though the AI may be more and more intelligent, our global system and society isn't intelligent enough to deal with it. It's almost like a co-evolution. The technology is getting better, but the bad things you can do with the technology are things for which society is not prepared.
Yeah, so that's fantastic, and I think you answered to the point in a lot of very practical and summary ways. So thank you so much, because it's not easy to go through all these areas. So keeping on the AI for now, and so one of your areas of research, like you mentioned before, is the areas of I just want to go through the right areas here. But you've been looking at a research in terms of how to apply multi-agents and algorithms that can automate norms synthesis, and as well looking at how to apply this in society and creating a smart society. So I think this probably is the evolving from the first part that you're touching. How can we make that happen, especially right now when we are in a very sensitive moment where the world economy and the world society is becoming digital, whatever you want it or not. In one end, there's a good thing that COVID-19 brought. So that means we are all right now using digital tools to perform and to interact. And of course, this will create a lot of issues in terms of social, emotional balance, but it creates a lot of opportunities. The challenge right now is, of course, this is creating as well a huge economical and financial meltdown. But for instance, if you look purely from data, and we actually did this with another interview with another expert in AI and business analytics, is if you look at business analytics and picking and researching multi-agents and different areas, you could actually apply just looking at a country requirements. Let's say if you just put data of, let's say, all the companies in Scotland, and we put it in machine learning, and we look at the companies that are on the verge of bankruptcy, or at least in very bad situations, the government can see, looking at metrics, the ones that can be saved, the ones cannot be saved. And this can be applied as well to create jobs for young people and a lot of other people. Because if you look, okay, we have this society with 6 million people, these areas are not fooled and we need to fool. So in theory, the work of experts like you is amazing, but then the governments are not doing any of this. And I think the challenge, and that's why I think makes sense. So how do you see this kind of conceptual work in one end that is creating a kind of human intelligence and human social balance, and as well the frame between the industry that you touch very, I think, picking in your own words, I think you mentioned something that I really like a lot, that is the area of apply mechanisms and ethical assignments to avoid the AI, but as well to come up with more pragmatism, because the only way we can kill a lot of these things is come up with utilitarian systems. So I don't know, I just want to keep on this angle. If you have some you touched already this.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is I sometimes when I do give presentations, I sketch this vision of that. In theory, you could use all this stuff to have almost like an economy, almost without money or without kind of chaotic, decentralized decision making where there's a lot of faults. Right. So in theory, you could have a very well coordinated thing where you gather all the data, you make some political decision about where the resources should go, where the money should go, where the workforce should go. And you could almost have like a bird's eye view to optimize the economy. I think in practice, we have some significant roadblocks, though, to solve in order to get there. As you're saying, the governments don't seem ready to be able to do these, evidence-based and rational responses to crises. I think the first roadblock is we are still really behind on bringing all the data together. And by that, I don't mean that there isn't enough data. I mean, there isn't enough of a willingness from all the different stakeholders to share and open up the data and join it. There's a lot of thinking about commercial sensitivity. There's a lot of thinking around giving away data to competitors. And what I'm advocating here isn't necessarily open data or making things public. You can have very bespoke and commercially careful agreements to share different types of data and so on. But I think in many parts of the economy, that is really still hard to do. And governments themselves, in terms of just their data awareness and the data skills of the key people who could make that happen, are just not there yet. There is a huge amount of help that they need to get there. The deeper roadblock is somebody, or I wouldn't call it a roadblock, but maybe more of a conundrum is kind of, how do you, somebody would have to set the objectives of those systems, and that's clearly a political decision. What would end up happening is, unless we're careful, is that of course the evidence for or against a certain measure, I mean, given that citizens and the general public will not be able to validate whether all the data has been checked, whether people were selectively giving more weight to some part of the evidence against another part. My concern would be that you could still manipulate those sorts of things politically, of course. So I think that's a deeper problem. In some of my research, I've tried to develop methods where, essentially you could crowdsource the objectives. So you could ask people, what should we optimize in this world, right? So if you have like ride sharing, should we optimize the revenue for the platform? Should we optimize fair wages for the drivers? Should we optimize customer satisfaction? And how do we mix these things? And I think you can do those things, you can crowdsource those things in principle. And I think that is the dream of what the pioneers of the internet always had, that it would become this big democracy where you could not be manipulated because nobody would have enough individual power. Unfortunately, we have seen that power still accumulates, and sometimes it's knowledge, sometimes it's the resources to, for example, deploy huge armies of social media trolls to influence the opinion. So I think what you are describing is very much probably the future of doing kind of evidence-based politics, based on and not just politics, but also business strategy, economic strategy. And I think that is the future. But I think, again, we don't have the institutional scaffolding so that we could deploy it now. And that as a citizen, I could relax and say, okay, I have reasonable trust that is working well.
Yeah, I think I like the idea of institutional scaffolding. I think it's a very good metaphor. So one thing, if you look at the AI arms race and not going political, partly what you just described is already happening. So if you look at what is happening with China, not going anything political, the Chinese government is already applying AI and blockchain on a massive scale. They just launched the blockchain protocol for right now, I think 200 cities and going to 452 cities worldwide, which is kind of, most of the blockchain research is still in the universities, if you take all the crypto part. And if you look at AI, is even more advanced, especially the way they're using this setup to create smart cities and so forth. So the challenge right now is that we have already governments applying all of this in a very big scale. And I think I'm not going to the political consequences, but this is already happening. So this is creating, in one end, a huge disbalance. And I think Professor Harari recently, in most of his talks in the World Economic Forum and other things, was talking precisely about kind of a new part of a system or world invasion, or kind of, how can we put it in these terms, the sense of we're going to have new colonies. data colonies. So the countries that are more advanced will be, of course, the invaders, and of course, the countries that are less advanced will be colonies of the other countries. And this is already happening, whether we like it or not. Okay, so I think we cannot just look at this purely from an academic or from an intellectual perspective, because it's happening as we speak. And of course, even in universities. So how can we, not going political, but going political in the Greek word polis, that is the city, how can we look at this from an academic and research perspective, and the scaffolding creating scaffolding institutions that we need that, and I love that metaphor. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on this, not going political, I think it's an important area.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you are right. I think, you know, we are seeing that there is this colonization. We are seeing that the tensions are mounting between the big players. We are seeing also that you know, many people don't notice this, but for example, in the area of cybersecurity, there is actually already kind of a war, which is an arms race, and it's happening on a daily basis in the background. And I think you mentioned earlier on that we are at this juncture where all this could give huge benefits and prosperity, or it could collapse. And I think it's difficult to make any political predictions, but I'll give you a parallel from what Edinburgh has always seen itself a little bit, because of the strong historical connections to the US, but on the other hand, because of being in Europe, and so as a bridge between East and West. And during the Cold War, Edinburgh was a place where we had, I think they were called the Edinburgh Conversations, where you really kind of, you know, as a somewhat neutral third party, try to bring both perspectives to the table, and then understand what you know, how mutual cooperation, and in those days peace, could be safeguarded by through dialogue. And I think we would like to do the same thing, and we aim to do the same thing. We have created a new big center for data and AI ethics, and around the future of AI and so on. And I think I would like to see that happen nowadays, most likely between the US and China in the first instance. And you will know that Europe as a whole is trying to position itself in terms of strength on the basis of responsible AI, rather than the kind of mostly rather than the American and Chinese kind of worlds, which are quite different in terms of outlook. So what? But what am I saying? Is that going to solve the problem? I think what that's going to show is whether, if you compare tech to the world of nuclear technology and the arms race we had there, we managed to resolve it by keeping these conversations going. But of course, I would ideally like AI and data not even to get to that point where it's seen as a similarly dangerous technology. I think it's also important to say that I think the key thing that has changed there is actually data and connectivity, and not AI. So I think these things partially would happen. You don't necessarily need to have smart algorithms or smart blockchains. I mean, of course, that adds certain capabilities, but I think it's actually more of an economic war, if you like, or arms race, if that makes sense. That's a lot around data, and I think that sort of tends to happen when there's any new big opportunity that all global leaders become aware of. So yeah, so I don't have the solution, but I think that there are a few things that can help in that conversation. For example, we work very closely with Chinese partners. We work very closely with American partners, for example, and we managed to do that in a reasonable way. And I think the way it works is that you make clear what your standards and objectives are, and you only engage with people on those terms, and you're also a critical friend to them, rather than just accepting what is done maybe in their wider political systems and countries. And I think in Europe, uh, what we have done, for example, with GDPR is quite important, because we have basically said that these are the rules of the game if you want to access our market. Um, and at the end of the day, you also sometimes have to flex your muscles a little bit in terms of your market power. Um, and for me, it's quite important that you build consensus between these markets, so you can grow your position there when you're negotiating with others on the global scale.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, and I think it's you partly answered to that in a very, I think, way. And I think the idea of make clear standards is critical, and how to apply these standards, and as well almost a kind of a neutrality empowerment to AI and data, or the part of data AI for creating a better future. So moving right now to Base Center and the work that you're doing. So I know that as University of Edinburgh is one of the universities in terms of computing science in the world. Just give us a bit of some of the highlights and the kind of the highlights and the things that you are very proud, but as well for the world to know, because I know that there's a lot of things happening in Edinburgh and in the Base Center that not a lot of people know, from working with NASA to a lot of robotics and things like that.
Yeah, so I've mentioned a little bit about the larger initiatives, but just to make that a bit more concrete. So what we've done in the center is we've brought in a lot of kind of different people who have expertise in the key areas. So, for example, we have our Edinburgh Center for Robotics, probably becoming the biggest group in robotics in the UK, and with amazing equipment like NASA's Valkyrie robot, that is a humanoid that will one day go to Mars. So that's one element, but we do a lot of work also, for example, in space and satellite data. We're working with an American startup that's going to send its CubeSats into space to make real-time weather observation possible, in helping airlines improve their routes and in real time with low latency. We've got lots of mathematicians, statisticians in the building. They're doing, for example, projects to optimize the energy system, energy power distribution in the UK, and also our parallel computing center, EPCC, maintains most of the UK's national supercomputing high performance computing infrastructure, and just got commissioned with the new national supercomputer contract for Archer 2. So they used to run the old supercomputer that was called Archer for many years, and now they will start up Archer 2 and are working towards some exascale computing projects. And so it's a mix of having these academic expertise and then mixing it with startups and young innovators and talent. So a third of the people in the building are PhD students from data science, robotics, natural language processing, biomedical AI, cybersecurity, mathematics, and so on. So all the kinds of areas that are relevant. We have our accelerator programs, an accelerator that we have run several times with Wyra, that's part of Telefonica, and also with support from Cisco, and our investor showcase called EIE. So this is a one-day event once a year where around 80 startups pitch to up to 200 investors. So that's brought 700 million pounds of investment to local startups over the last 12 years. And it also involves, the sorts of programs to coach and mentor businesses to develop their pitches. We also have several R&D labs with corporates, Royal Bank of Scotland, for example, Huawei, also collaborations with Intel and other big larger and smaller companies. SaaS is another example of a big corporate. So what we really want to try to do is to have this ecosystem where you've got kind of the best ideas, the brightest people, the most innovative companies, and the best partners to help create impact and spin up new ventures. And this is kind of for the university. I mentioned the university is 400 years old. If you imagine the university as a very old, big cruise ship on the seas of academia, our mission is really to change the course of that big ship by a few degrees to make it more outward facing, more porous, more open to the outside world, working in situ, working in our building with external partners. So we've got a facility, very nice big facility in the city center of Edinburgh that has space for around 600 people. There's around 500 in it already, and that's a mix of a third students, a third academics, a third external people. So it's really about all of them breathing the same air to help the university move more towards external organizations and the challenges that come from the economy and society. I mentioned the School of Informatics and our track record in AI. Of course, another thing that's happening is now that we have many other disciplines getting engaged with technology. For example, our geoscientists in space and satellites and Earth observation and climate monitoring, our mathematicians in doing statistics, modeling, operations research, and our physicists and chemists and biologists, for example, applying data-driven science to drive new discovery in their disciplines and create spin-offs with that in materials, in signal processing, in computational chemistry and drug design and so on. And all the way, of course, also to completely different areas like healthcare. We are now, of course, in the middle of the COVID crisis, and we know that the application of data science and AI will play a key role in dealing with this pandemic and with future pandemics in all kinds of ways, from diagnosis and treatment to epidemiology and modeling the impact and some of the things that we spoke about earlier on about the business impact and being able to make the right decisions there and the right policy making choices. So that's just kind of, you know, in a nutshell what we're trying to do. I guess the important thing is that we, in a sense, we're trying to maximize the value that you get out of everyone's investment. So my own university is going to invest over 100 million in this area out of its own money. We have a mandate to raise a lot of over 200 million from industry and the public sector to drive this kind of innovation. So there is a common understanding that to really make a step change in the regional and national economy, you really need to pull together resources from all parts of society and all sectors to make that happen. On the global scale, I think there is what's very interesting about the positioning of Scotland is that we're a relatively small country. We're an incredibly well-connected country between all ourselves. So, you know, it's my colleagues in London are sometimes quite jealous that, you know, here we tend to know our ministers and our government personally, and that we have close conversations with all the different other innovation centers and universities on a regular basis. So that, I think, is an advantage. We have an incredible amount of talent. We have, over the last 15 years, built a startup tech ecosystem that has flourished, you know, starting with a couple of startups in my old building in computer science in a back room with some kind of very, very early small ideas, to having two Scottish unicorns. One of them came out of the university, the other one decided to set up shop just next to us. And we've also, so now we've got hundreds of these ventures around us, and we work very closely with them. And also this has attracted big other players to Edinburgh, including IBM and Amazon, who have an R&D lab here at Skyscanner, and others. So I think sometimes investors who come across from the US or from Asia sometimes tell us, you know, you are the world's best kept secret. Scottish people tend to be quite modest and very hardworking, and you know, we want to really underpin everything we claim about what we do with substance and with quality. But I think we are really more than on par with lots of other hubs in Europe and across the world, and actually delivering far more impact per capita in terms of our citizens than many other places. So that's something to be quite proud of, and it's also as a member of the university to be quite proud of, to be able to build on the expertise of all the people in the different disciplines to drive that, rather than starting something from scratch. So it's we're very proud to be the oldest kind of civic university established in the UK. So we were not established by a king, we were not established by the church. We really belong to the city of Edinburgh, and we are kind of acting globally, but rooted in the local environment and in our city, and really very conscious of our role to have a positive impact on our city and also in the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's kind of a great track record that the world needs to know. And I think it's really a secret sometimes. Of course, it's well known, but not well known as probably a lot of other universities. So I think we passed already 1 hour. So one of the last things that I would like to ask, and keeping more or less this, but I really want to touch that part. So looking at your research and looking at the idea coming back probably to AI and to create a message of hope. So how can we create a collective? So I think part of the solution, and we touched that partly, is related to collective intelligence, and part of the success of the University of Edinburgh and Bay Centre is that collective intelligence of putting society working together and talent, like you mentioned, but as well is about creating a human-friendly environment and human-friendly AI. So as a message of hope, especially right now, and you touch a bit the work you've been doing in terms of healthcare and AI for COVID-19. So definitely we are in a big question mark about what is going to happen, and definitely whatever we do now, all of us, because we are all part of this, can make a big change. So how would you be your recommendations, being a citizen of the world that's been coming from one of the oldest and most successful civilizations in history, in Greece, but as well from Germany, and of course right now being in Edinburgh and Scotland? How do you see, and what would be your vision, both as an academic and as well as a thought leader, and as well a leader in a lot of different areas?
I think this is really, it's a little bit a now or never moment, I think. You know, we have all collectively worked towards, you know, creating the technology and creating the foundations, coming from more the technologist and the researcher's point of view, that would allow us really to make a big impact, so that the next time a big crisis happens, not just a health crisis, but any crisis, we can be ahead of the curve. You know, everybody's talking about we need to flatten the curve. I think, okay, this time we need to flatten the curve. The next time we need to be ahead of it and not even let it grow. And for me, the message of hope is really that I see, well, first of all, I see a generation, especially a younger generation, that is very conscious not only of the power of technology to make a positive impact on that, and the power of collaborating around data and technology to help solve these issues, but also is very conscious of being vigilant about the potential dangers. I was so to give you two examples of this, in my own university, just in one university, within a couple of weeks after starting a web page where we were collecting people's ideas, we had a list of 140 projects on COVID alone, most of which were somehow to do with data. So it shows that people want to collaborate across the disciplines, understand the value of technology, understand how it impacts everybody from a virologist to an epidemiologist to the person who wants to manufacture protective equipment and the person who wants to do business impact assessments of the crisis. So I think the potential of technology to help is great, and the willingness and ways in which we have been able to mobilize people across the world, and essentially an invisible army of people sitting on their Skype calls and Zoom calls, but actually pulling together to spin up new and useful activity to respond rapidly to this crisis is really, really impressive. On the other hand, to give you an example of this, the importance of this being vigilant and making sure we do these things in beneficial ways. There were a lot of discussions initially about contact tracing apps and how we can do that in secure ways and so on. And to see how fast people from different countries engaged with that, highlighted the dangers, offered solutions, how quickly then, in some cases at least, some countries, stepped away from initial proposals where risks were identified. So I found that quite impressive. Earlier on, we were talking about how slow sometimes we still are and how some parts of society are not ready for some of the innovations yet and how much more work there is to do. But equally, I think that when there is a will to collaborate and to make a positive change, I have been quite impressed by how much we can mobilize, how many resources and people we can mobilize in a very short period of time. And I'm absolutely sure that that would not have been possible without the technology, but also without, if you like, data and evidence-based reasoning and rational decision-making having become woven into the fabric of public debate and public thinking. Of course, we know there are people out there that resist it, and there are people out there that try to go against that kind of enlightened and rational way of trying to solve problems together with all the knowledge we have, and that will remain to be something we have to fight. But I'm very hopeful that we are developing the capability and the willingness to do that. I think an area where we need to do more is international coordination. I see that citizens, researchers, businesses are very, very openly, closely collaborating across the world. The institutions and the governments and the decision makers higher up have not demonstrated that they have been able to coordinate these things that fast. So I think there is a lot of work there to do. But hopefully they will understand also that getting through these crises requires that.
That's very inspiring, and I appreciate, because it's really we need to shift the attention to more positive narrative. And I think narrative is everything, because if you don't start to narrate, even when you program an algorithm, if you don't put the narrative clear, you might end up actually with a monster, or at least with something that doesn't work. So I think probably as the last parts, I would like to probably where people can find some of your papers, some of your information, some of the things about Base Center and the work you've been doing, because I think it's important. We have quite a big audience that is growing. And I think our focus is precisely to highlight the good things that are happening, because we have a lot of good things happening. So if you could highlight some of the things and some of the websites and platforms, and even some of the papers that you suggest for people that are listening to this.
So I would invite everybody to look at the Base Center website. So if you just Google Base Center Edinburgh, that's very easy to find, to understand, to learn more about our wider work. And as a center, we also view ourselves as a front end for people from outside the university who, in order to navigate the university landscape, you can always come and talk to us, and we'll direct you to the right people in other departments. We have, of course, 20 schools and 3 colleges. We're a big university. For my own research profile, if you just look for my name on the in the School of Informatics at the university, you will find that in the Artificial Intelligence and its Applications Institute, which is one of the 6 institutes in informatics. But I am also very lucky to have a very unusual surname. So if you Google me, I believe I am still the first hit, luckily. Not due to my fame, but due to the rarity of the surname.
No, thank you so much. We're going to put all these links in the interview. This will be distributed in a lot of websites, including right now it's China as well, where we start right now distributing our videos. So probably one last question following up to wrap up this. So I think one of your areas of expertise is the idea of smart society. And given that our platform is about cities and Cities ABC, creating a better narrative for cities and for citizens, what would be kind of your overview in terms of the idea of a better smart society and the collective human activity, which is part of what you have, and I think especially part of your research?
Yes, I mean, I think the key thing that I have learned from projects in this area is that you really need to design these services for the citizen. So we are technologists, and as technologists and as academics, you know, of course, I'm always very excited to develop a new algorithm or a new platform. But in reality, the technology should follow the human and not the other way around. I'm going to give you a very simple example. In one of my big projects, we were designing a ride-sharing platform, and then we took to trial it to one of our partners was in Israel. And he wanted to use it at his university, where students use this platform to find people to drive home on the weekend and so on. And we designed the platform, you know, with our assumptions about what people would care about, you know, how much do they pay for the ride, how long does it take, what is the departure time. But actually, it turns out what they cared about was whether people were smoking in the car and or whether they had dogs. So what I learned from this is, and we spoke about fragmentation of the global landscape and so on. What I learned from this is that human society has a lot of diversity. There are lots of different cultures. There are lots of different individuals. And the primary thing you have to try to do in cities and with collective intelligence and services that require large-scale human participation is really to understand the values, preferences, and objectives of the people who will participate, because essentially these systems are nothing without the data and activity contributed by people. And I think in the smart cities world, for a very long time, there was a strong focus on instrumenting the environment, having the sensors, having the smartness in the physical environment. Now, that is, of course, an important part, but equally, we know that many collective intelligence things happen with very lightweight technology, and that it's not always about the hardware and the kit and the intelligent sensors. So, so I think what I have learned in particular through working with users is that the emphasis needs to always be on the design of how the value is added to the city. And then identifying the best possible technology to deliver the functionality that generates the value rather than the other way around. I think that's very important. There are very low-tech solutions for very useful things, and some require more technology, and sometimes it will be a mix. But I think the smartness is not always proportional to the amount of technology used. I think that's my key observation for that area. And the other thing is really to understand diversity. And I'm not just talking about cultural diversity or that understanding that different users are different, but also thinking about things like exclusion. For example, if you introduce a system, how does it impact people who are not on the system? We still have a digital divide. We still have lots of people who are not participating as much in these new technologies as others. And I think in order to responsibly deploy solutions in cities, we need to take all these factors into account.
Yeah, that's fantastic insights, and that's actually critical because normally we don't separate these things. So last question, and I think given you that you are an academic and of course a leader in one of the leading universities, so how do you see education and special education in the time of AI, and what would be the last references and as well some suggestions you might have for our audience?
So I think to address many of the issues we've described before, I already emphasized more education is needed, but I really think this has now reached the point where it needs to be something completely standard. People need to understand. They don't need to be able to program AI. They don't need to be coders, but I think they need to understand digital technology and informatics technology, and also some principles of the more advanced things like AI or blockchain or machine learning, at least at the same level at which they learn about, let's say, biology or mathematics or history at school. I really think, and unfortunately, I am not hearing this enough from governments and educators in the educational system, of a real strong effort to embed that throughout the curriculum of people from a young age. If you want to, you mentioned resources. There is a fantastic online course from the University of Helsinki that has been taken by 300,000 people that's called Elements of AI. And I think it's a very nice illustration of what you can teach people without requiring them to have technical expertise. Because I think what we need citizens who are empowered to make the right decisions, who are empowered to safely and responsibly be able to use the tools, but also to judge the technologies and contribute to the debate. And I think this is really urgent. I'm sure if we have this conversation again in 5 years, we will be talking about completely new technologies. And I don't think as societies we can afford for the wider citizenship to really fall behind. So we can't have these kind of waves where the innovation comes first, then the governments need to catch up, and then the citizens can only catch up. What we need to be on the front foot so that people are really kind of ready for the future innovations. And I think with computing more generally, that chance has been missed. I think if everybody understood the basics of computational thinking and how computing works 20 years ago, then we would have a much more mature population and workforce now. So therefore, it's essential that people catch up now. And as I say, sometimes it's a little bit misleading for people to think, I don't want to be a coder. I don't want to be a programmer, because I don't think they have to be. That would be a little bit like me being able to become an accountant after I learned maths at school, which it was not the objective. The objective was to understand how things work and be able to rationally think through them and use them in your career.
Well, fantastic and inspirational. Thank you so much, Professor Michael. It's been a pleasure and privilege, and we'll publish and promote this to the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.